Here's our video on the Cold War. We haven't had a video in a while, so I know you're very excited. Your left side will be two columns, things that the Soviets and the US agreed on and things that they disagreed on, or ways they were the same and ways they were different. So this video picks up after World War II ends, but also things that were happening at the end of World War II. So we already talked about the end of World War II in the last unit, so there's a little bit of overlap here, so don't let that confuse you. So the US and the Soviets were allies in World War II. So how was it that they became enemies? Well, keep in mind that before the war even ended, things were already starting to go awry before them. The US was upset about the non-aggression pact, the Soviets were upset that the US weren't helping them sooner, and things like that. So FDR, Stalin, and Churchill met in Yalta to discuss the post-war plan before the war even ended in February of '45. They agreed that Germany would be divided into 4 zones, that Germany would have to compensate the Soviets, and in exchange, the Soviets agreed to help fight against Japan. They also discussed having an unconditional surrender for Nazi Germany, which was different than World War I, because remember then they just had the treaties and they didn't require Germany to actually surrender. This is the second of 3 big conferences in World War II. The first one was Tehran, and the third one was Potsdam, that we'll get to in a minute. It also discussed free elections, especially with the creation of Poland, and also they discussed hunting Nazi war criminals down and trying them after the war. So there's Churchill on the left, FDR in the middle. He actually died not long after this conference, and Stalin there on the right. Here's a map that shows how Germany would be divided. That melony orangish color is the French zone, which actually had to be divided out of the British and American zone, and you see the Soviet zone there on the east. The UN is also created as a result of the end of World War II. It's created in June of '45, where 51 countries joined it to protect members against aggression. This is basically a replacement of the League of Nations. It's supposed to be the new and improved version. The General Assembly is like the UN's Parliament or Congress, where each member or country could vote. It had a Security Council to settle disputes, and 5 of those 11 members of the council were permanent, and those were the victors, basically, of World War II. Here's its flag. It's like from the earth looking down, as to not be biased. There's the General Assembly in the UN. Maybe some of you have been there. It's in Manhattan. I've been there a couple times this year even, so I'll show you some pictures maybe if you remind me. So there were different goals between the Soviets and the Americans after World War II. And why is that? One reason is because how differently the war treated them. The US unfortunately suffered 40,000 deaths, but the Soviets 5 times as much. That's one example. So the Soviets also decided, hey, you know what? We don't want to be invaded again like we were in World War II and World War I by Napoleon and so on and so forth. So they wanted this buffer zone where these smaller countries that were carved up would be under their influence, have communist governments, and protect them if an invasion ever occurred again. This, however, without these free elections, actually went against the Yalta Agreement, which we just discussed. So what happens next? What happens is in the East you have this sphere of influence by communism and the Soviets. That's those red countries. And the blue, you get the sphere of influence of America or the Western nations. Here's a political cartoon of the Iron Curtain. Keep in mind the Iron Curtain was not a physical wall or barrier. In April 12th of '45, FDR died and Truman became president. Stalin ignores the free elections in Eastern Europe, and there's now another conference. Truman's there, Stalin's there, and also Churchill, and then Attlee, because there were elections in England, and Churchill is no longer the leader. And so that's Attlee there on the left, our President Truman looking dapper in the middle, and Stalin on the right. So this Potsdam Conference was to establish a post-war order to deal with peace treaty issues. It outlined the terms of surrender for Japan and discussed countering the effects of war. Truman also mentioned a powerful new weapon, hinting at, of course, the atomic bomb. Now, Germany split into 2. The Soviets controlled the eastern part, including half of the capital, which became the German Democratic Republic. And then you have the western half, which is the free half. Churchill, in a speech in Missouri, makes a reference to an Iron Curtain, and now we have an ideological and physical separation between East and Western Europe. Don't worry about a password. I'll see you next class.